This woman was both selfish and cruel. Her husband's company faced bankruptcy due to a momentary lapse by her brother-in-law. Her upright husband intended to use all their family savings to weather the crisis, but her actions drove him to the edge of a cliff, where he chose to take his own life. This woman's name was Machi. She and her younger brother Suran had fought desperately just to survive since childhood. Later, she built a decent life with her talented husband Nongu. Nongu adored her deeply. They had an older daughter in high school and a son in elementary school. Machi was also carrying a 3-month-old fetus. She had relentlessly strived to enter high society. She vowed never to return to the destitute life of the past. This time, Nongu's company faced crisis when Suran procured a batch of cosmetics containing carcinogens. The products were seized, and the company must compensate distributors for all losses. Nongu proposed using their life savings to weather the storm, assuring his wife he would make a comeback. Yet Machi not only rejected his offer outright, but presented divorce papers, explaining her actions were for the children's sake. She insisted the company's debts mustn't jeopardize their home, leaving the children homeless. Nongu finally agreed to the divorce. Heartbroken, unexpectedly, Machi then went to the hospital seeking an abortion, but due to a placenta previa, forcing the procedure would endanger her life. This forced Machi to abandon her decision. She then rushed home and transferred all the property and savings into her own name. Finally, without hesitation, Machi prepared to take both children abroad to start a new life. Meanwhile, Nongu was cornered at the company by Machi's friend Diane, demanding repayment. It turned out Machi had swindled Diane out of $4,000,000,000 before leaving. Nongu couldn't accept it. If the company had that $4,000,000,000 in working capital, it could have weathered this crisis. Just then, Machi called. She informed her husband she was leaving for abroad with the children. Immediately, they would have no further contact. Diane snatched the phone, shouting demands for repayment. Machi then removed her wedding ring and tossed it into the trash. She departed with all her assets, severing ties with her husband. Their eldest daughter, Yumi, saw the crisis facing her father's company on TV. Disregarding her mother's orders, she chose to stay. Nongu rushed to the airport hoping to see his children one last time, but he was pinned to the ground by security for forcing his way through. Machi ruthlessly sold the house at a bargain price. Nongu had lost not only his most precious family, but now even a place to call home. Unconsciously, he found himself at the edge of a cliff. Nongu had lost all faith in life. Just as he prepared to end his own life, a desperate cry for help caught his attention. Nongu rescued a girl, Holly, who had accidentally lost her footing. This selfless act of saving her gave him a new lease on life. Nongu's exceptional abilities were recognized and put to good use by Holly's mother, Suran. Over time, Nongu and Suran developed feelings for each other and eventually married. Through relentless effort, Nongu became a renowned entrepreneur. Meanwhile, Machi initially gave birth to a daughter abroad. She then took a lover, living a carefree life. Soon, however, her lover swindled away all her assets. Just then, Machi learned Nongu had become a wealthy tycoon. She immediately returned to Korea with her 2 children. Machi wanted to reclaim Nongu and resume her life of luxury, but now, she couldn't even afford food for her children. Left with no choice, she removed the few remaining pieces of jewelry from her body and went to a pawn shop to exchange them for a few days' worth of living expenses. As she emerged, Machi cursed and railed against the pawn shop's greed. Just then, her friend Diane happened to spot her and demanded repayment of the $4,000,000,000 she had swindled from her. Ultimately, Machi was captured by Diane's subordinates and taken to a scrapyard for a brutal beating. Diane threatened to grind her into mincemeat if she didn't repay the money immediately. Seeing this, Machi hurriedly claimed her ex-husband was now wealthy. She promised to get the money back to Diane as soon as possible, but Diane didn't believe Machi's words. She thought Nongu and Suran were deeply in love now. How could he possibly return to the treacherous Machi? Diane slapped Machi hard across the face. Machi had no choice but to call her younger brother. Suchong panicked upon seeing his sister covered in injuries. Machi instructed him to tell Diane that Nongu had bought her plane ticket to bring her back and was about to reconcile with her. Though Suchong knew his sister was lying, for her safety, he could only nod in agreement. Diane made Machi sign a life agreement as collateral. If this turned out to be another lie and she failed to repay the debt within 2 months, her life would be forfeited to settle the debt. Suchong then took his sister to the hospital for treatment and kindly urged her to take the children abroad immediately to avoid any unforeseen incidents. Machi's purpose in returning this time was to reclaim Nongu, who had become wealthy. She believed that if she succeeded, not only could she repay the debts she owed, but she could also become a wealthy woman and enjoy life. Suchong rebuked his sister's misguided thinking. To secure his help, Machi revealed. She had left Nongu out of necessity for the children's sake. Now she'd returned not only to reunite the children with their father, but also to reclaim her own husband. She then instructed her brother to embezzle 200 million won from the company under Nongu's name to fund her plan. This put Suchan in a difficult position, but remembering the moment his older sister had risked her life to protect him, Suchan had once sworn that, when he grew up, he would protect his sister, so he chose to betray Nongu and use Nongu's name to embezzle 200 million won from the company account. With the money in hand, Machi immediately began executing her plan to reclaim her ex-husband. She purchased numerous household items and rented an apartment directly next door to Nongu's current residence. Simultaneously, she visited her eldest daughter's workplace. Machi was deeply dissatisfied that her daughter worked so exhaustingly, yet earned such a low salary she couldn't even afford a designer handbag. Meanwhile, Holly, the daughter of Nongu's current wife, lived like a princess, the sight of that family of radiating pure happiness. In Machi's eyes, Suran and Holly were simply superfluous. She vowed to reunite with Nongu at any cost. Machi then set her plan in motion. First, she sought out her eldest daughter, Yumi. Yet Yumi showed no joy at seeing her mother. Instead, she questioned her sudden reappearance and decision to move next door. When Dad was down and out, Mom fled abroad alone. Now that Dad is wealthy again, Mom suddenly shows up. Machi explained it was all to protect the children from harm, and that her divorce from her husband was merely nominal. Yet Yumi no longer believed her mother's words. She didn't want her mother's presence to disrupt the happy life her father shared with his new wife. She demanded her mother leave immediately. Enraged by this, Machi lunged to strike Yumi. Just then, Holly, the stepmother's daughter, appeared. Neither woman revealed their true relationship in front of Holly. Later, Machi summoned Yumi to her home again. Yumi placed her passbook directly on the table. These were the savings she had accumulated over the years, scrimping and saving while also repaying her mother's debts. She further pledged to contribute her future wages toward household expenses. Yumi only wished her mother would take her younger siblings and move away. She truly didn't want her father to be dragged into trouble again because of her mother. Unexpectedly, these words were overheard by her younger brother Minki, who had just returned. Minki had always seen his sister as his emotional anchor. 7 years ago at the airport, Yumi insisted on staying with their father. The siblings were separated then. All these years, he had longed for his sister, but upon returning, Minki discovered not only had their father remarried and abandoned him, but his sister was also forcing him to leave. Unaware of the truth, Minki grew weary of his family. Seeing his brother's hate-filled gaze, Yumi was overcome with anguish. She blamed her mother for making things this way. Machi felt no remorse whatsoever. Her sole purpose was to return to Nongu's side and become a wealthy wife. The next day, Machi learned from her drunken brother that had been bullying Yumi all along. She also discovered Yumi had been paying off her debts, yet she remained unmoved. Machi devised a scheme to regain her daughter's trust. Just as Diane arrived at Yumi's workplace to torment her again, Machi suddenly appeared, grabbed her hair, and warned her not to drag their feud into the child's life. She then gave Diane a thorough scolding. Yumi stepped out to stop those who came to investigate. Regarding Diane's anger after being beaten, Machi explained that her actions were also meant to repay the debt owed to Yumi sooner. Only by winning Yumi's trust could she return to her ex-husband swiftly. Diane finally realized she'd been manipulated by Machi. She could only leave with a helpless smile. Machi's actions truly made Yumi feel maternal love. Machi immediately adopted the guise of a devoted mother, showering Yumi with concern. Now, the only obstacle left to Machi's reunion with her ex-husband was his current wife. Taking advantage of Nongu's business trip, she visited his home and made contact with Suran. Unbeknownst to Suran, Machi was her husband's ex-wife. In Machi's mind, Suran seemed like an easy opponent to defeat. She had intended to come and provoke her, but instead, she saw the house filled with happy photos of Nongu and Suran together. Machi's face instantly fell. She then sarcastically remarked that remarried couples had a high divorce rate. Suran could only offer an awkward smile in response, but Suran's mother, Haijin, couldn't stand by and watch. She deliberately poured tea into a mug printed with photos of her daughter and son-in-law, and in front of Machi, spoke of her daughter and son-in-law's happy married life. Machi felt deeply annoyed upon hearing this. Taking advantage of their absence, Machi grabbed the mug and smashed it violently on the floor. Suran and her mother rushed out upon hearing the noise. Just then, Yumi returned home. She watched in shock as her mother carried out her act. That evening, Yumi stormed to Machi's room, furiously declaring she would sever all mother-daughter ties. In Yumi's heart, Suran's family were the saviors who had given her and her father a new lease on life. Had Suran not appeared back then, Dad would have lost his will to live and left this world. Now that Dad had finally rediscovered his purpose in life, Yumi would never allow her mother to hurt them again. Finally, Yumi threatened to tell her father everything. This caught Machi completely off guard. The next day, she went to the company and found her younger brother. She ordered him to embezzle another 300 million won before Nongu returned from his business trip. But this time, she wasn't so lucky. Suchong had just entered his brother-in-law's office when Suran suddenly called out to him from behind. Seeing this, Suchong made an excuse and hurriedly slipped away. Machi, still waiting for the money to arrive, asked her brother what had happened. Unexpectedly, Suchong declared he would no longer betray his brother-in-law to help her. Machi was furious, nearly losing her mind. Now all her plans were in disarray. Nongu was returning today. She had to stop her daughter from exposing her secrets. Machi rushed to her daughter's studio by car, while simultaneously calling Yumi, but Yumi refused to meet her. After getting out of the car, Machi suddenly saw her daughter in danger. She threw herself forward, pushing her daughter out of harm's way. The impact sent Machi flying, knocking her unconscious. Yumi, terrified, immediately dialed emergency services. Staring at her unconscious mother, Yumi recalled the harsh words she'd hurled at her earlier. This memory only deepened her anguish and self-reproach. Upon arriving at the hospital, doctors immediately began resuscitation efforts on Machi. Suchong, meanwhile, learned of his sister's accident. His heart ached unbearably. This brought back memories of their childhood, when they had relied solely on each other. His sister had endured so much suffering for his sake. Now, Suchong prayed only for his sister's survival. He resolved to help her accomplish anything she needed. Soon after, Machi finally regained consciousness. Yumi threw herself at her mother, weeping. Machi then revealed a triumphant smile. It turned out this entire ordeal was a scheme orchestrated by her and Diane. The collision had been arranged by Diane. Machi intended to use this method to gain her daughter's trust and execute her plan to reclaim her ex-husband. She then asked Yumi to help her win back her ex-husband. This left Yumi feeling torn. She didn't want to hurt her stepmother's family. She could only plead with her mother not to do it, but Machi threatened her with her younger siblings, claiming it was because of Yumi that they couldn't live with their father. She intended to use this to force Yumi into helping her reunite with her ex-husband. On her way home, Yumi was plunged into a difficult dilemma, recalling how her younger brother was mocked and bullied by classmates for not having a father, and how her sister Suji had never known a father's love since birth. Yumi wept bitterly in anguish. Ultimately, she resolved to help her mother reconcile with her father for her siblings' sake. Machi was overjoyed. She knew Yumi had fallen into her trap. She ordered her daughter to sever ties with Suran's family and return to her side. On her way back, Yumi encountered Holly. Seeing Yumi deep in thought, Holly reached out to take her hand, but Yumi pushed him away. Yumi had resolved to sacrifice Holly's family's happiness to restore her siblings' well-being. In the days that followed, she deliberately grew distant toward Holly's family. Meanwhile, the recovered Machi began pursuing her ex-husband. She arrived at the kindergarten and saw Nongu interacting with a little girl she didn't recognize. Just as she was about to approach, she unexpectedly found Hyjin there too. Machi had no choice but to hide for the moment. After all, now wasn't the time to reveal her relationship with her ex-husband. Back home, she angrily ordered Yumi to call Hyjin away. Yumi had no choice but to comply. Machi then began preparing Nongu's favorite dishes at home. She arranged matching couples' pajamas on the bed. Finally, she dressed herself up beautifully. Yumi was tasked with keeping an eye on the stepmother's family. When the doorbell rang, Machi opened the door. Nongu's smile vanished the moment he saw Machi. He couldn't believe his neighbor was his ex-wife. Nongu then looked at Suji and realized Suji was his biological daughter he'd never met. Nongu couldn't accept it all at once. He felt both joy and heartache. His two children, unseen for 7 years, had finally returned safely. The next day, Nongu sought out Machi again. He berated her for disappearing with the children all those years ago. Machi, however, put on a pitiful act. She spoke of her endless longing for him over the past 7 years. She also insisted the children couldn't grow up without a father. Machi believed that with the children, Nongu would surely take her back. Thinking of the suffering the children had endured all these years, Nongu could no longer hold back and broke down. He went to his son's school wanting to properly see his son. Upon learning Nongu had gone to see his son, Machi flashed a smug, triumphant smile. Meanwhile, Suchong took advantage of Nongu's absence to transfer 300 million won from the company account into Machi's account. Just as Machi felt everything was under her control, she suddenly learned Holly had found the dashcam footage from the witness to her car accident. This made Machi suddenly recall the time she had Diane arrange the accident. It must have been overheard by the taxi driver. Panicked, she tried to find the driver's contact information. Finally, she managed to track down the driver. Facing the ruthless woman before him, the driver was so frightened he backed away repeatedly. Suddenly, Machi dropped to her knees. Pretending to be pitiful, she confessed to the driver that she had staged the accident to win back her daughter's heart. She begged the driver not to reveal the truth. Unwittingly moved by Machi's feigned sincerity, the driver ultimately agreed to her plea. After returning home, Nongu called to arrange a meeting. Excited, Machi meticulously primped herself again, daydreaming about Nongu confessing his feelings to her. But unexpectedly, upon meeting, Nongu demanded custody of all the children. Enraged, Machi slapped him across the face. If she couldn't reunite with Nongu and become a wealthy wife, she would never relinquish custody of the children. Nongu made it clear to Machi she shouldn't fantasize about reconciliation. He had always resented her for abandoning him at the last moment. Nongu urged Machi to avoid court battles over custody and demanded a prompt decision. After careful consideration, Machi hadn't anticipated this turn of events, but she wouldn't let Nongu dictate her fate. The next day, when Nongu arrived at Machi's home, he found she had vanished. He feared she might disappear with the children, just as she had 7 years prior. Meanwhile, Machi had moved the 2 children to a dilapidated place. This was her warning to Nongu. If he refused to remarry her, he'd never see the children again. However, Machi's move infuriated Diane. She suspected Machi was fleeing again without repaying the $4 billion debt. Diane had her subordinates track down Machi and bring her to an abandoned warehouse. She slapped Machi hard across the face and ordered her men to produce the prepared poison needle. Seeing this, Machi angrily called Diane a fool. She explained her move was merely to scare Nongu and ordered Diane to call Nongu to verify. The moment the call connected, Nongu's anxious voice filled the line. Only then did Diane believe her. Soon after, Nongu rushed to the warehouse and rescued Machi. Through her meticulous plan, the family was finally reunited. Nongu couldn't bear seeing the children suffer living with Machi in that dilapidated house. This was precisely the outcome Machi intended with her plan, to make Nongu realize he couldn't be separated from the children. If he wanted them, he'd have to reconcile with her first. Only after Nongu's persistent insistence did Machi reluctantly agree to move back with the children. But her condition was that Nongu must never tell his current wife, Suran, about their arrangement. Machi knew revealing their relationship to Suran now would only bring trouble upon herself. The next day, Machi met with Suran again. Harboring ulterior motives, she tried to sow discord between Nongu and Suran. But Suran trusted Nongu deeply. Though Machi felt bitter inside, she still feigned praise for their strong marital bond. Just then, Suran's landline rang. Simultaneously, her phone received a message from Nongu. Seeing it was Nongu inviting his wife to a hotel rendezvous that evening, Machi seized the moment when Suran wasn't looking, grabbed the phone, replied with an agreement, and promptly deleted the message. As she left, Machi deliberately mentioned to Suran that she herself had a hotel rendezvous with her husband that night. It seemed Machi intended to replace Suran at the hotel meeting with Nongu. Unbeknownst to Suran, for the evening rendezvous, Machi specifically sought out Yumi to do her makeup and shared the news of her date with Nongu. Unaware of the truth, Yumi was overjoyed and looked forward to the family reuniting. That evening, Holly returned home and was puzzled to find her mother there. Daddy wasn't supposed to surprise you at the hotel today. Only then did Yumi realize her mother had gone to meet her stepmother with her father. Suran also sensed something was amiss. She hurried to head to the hotel, but she suddenly recalled Machi had also mentioned meeting at that hotel. This gave her a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Nongu was meticulously setting up a romantic atmosphere in the room. Just then, the doorbell rang, but when he opened the door, he found it was Machi. This was Machi's perfect chance to reconcile with Nongu. She immediately tackled Nongu to the floor. Meanwhile, Suran was frantically pounding on the hotel room door, but there was no response from inside. Helpless, she called Nongu's phone. Inside the room, only Machi remained. It turned out Nongu had pushed Machi away earlier. Yumi called to tell her father that Suran was on her way to the hotel. Nongu hurriedly left the room to avoid any misunderstanding with Suran. He then told Suran over the phone he was at a cafe. After finding Nongu, Suran snatched the room key card and stormed back to the room. Her face twisted with fury. She had to see exactly what was going on inside. But after searching thoroughly, she found nothing amiss. She demanded to know why Nongu had come to the hotel for a day without telling her. Nongu claimed he had texted her. Suran remained deeply suspicious. She grabbed Nongu's phone and opened his messages. Sure enough, she found the text he had sent her, though nothing ultimately happened. A rift had formed between Nongu and Suran. That day, Suran accidentally witnessed her husband and Suji addressing each other as father and daughter. After recent events, she finally realized the woman living next door, Machi, was her husband's ex-wife. Seeing Machi as someone trying to steal her husband, Suran naturally wouldn't let it go. She quickly tracked down Machi's friend, Diane, originally intending to learn about Machi through her. Unexpectedly, the tattoo on Diane's bodyguard's hand caught Suran's attention. Holly had witnessed the motorcycle driver who fled the accident scene bearing the same tattoo. Instantly, Suran deduced Diane was the mastermind behind it all. She threatened Diane, declaring she'd use her connections to destroy her career in insurance. Diane asked what Suran wanted her to do. Suran replied, "Just send Machi out of the country permanently." Diane understood what she must do. She arranged to meet Machi and revealed Suran's plan. Machi refused to be sent abroad so easily. Diane had no choice but to restrain her and commit her to a psychiatric hospital. As long as Machi refused to leave the country, she would never be released. Diane then took Machi's phone and sent a text to Yumi, stating that mom would be traveling abroad for a while. With Machi out of the way, Suran began winning over the children's hearts and allowed her husband to live with them. Just as Suran thought everything was moving in a positive direction, Machi, confined in the psychiatric hospital and subjected to relentless abuse, realized she was powerless to resist. Finally, Machi knelt before Diane, offering herself to be used. Seeing this, Diane gave her one chance. She ordered Machi to sign 3 life insurance policies. 2 of the beneficiaries included Nongu and Suran. The third was the owner of Yumi's studio. Diane warned that if Machi failed, she would collect all outstanding debts from her 3 children. With her daughter's help, Machi successfully secured the first policy from the studio owner. Unaware of the truth, Yumi was relieved her mother was becoming self-sufficient and shared the news with her father. Nongu was also shocked by Machi's transformation. Meanwhile, Machi had arrived at Suran's doorstep to secure her policy. Pretending to be a reformed person, she convinced Suran to sign a life insurance contract. Little did she know this very policy would send Suran to her grave. Ultimately, Machi completed all 3 policies, temporarily sparing her from Diane's wrath. She was preparing another scheme to sabotage Nongu and Suran's relationship, when unexpectedly, Suran became pregnant. This news filled Nongu with ecstatic joy. All these years of marriage, they had never had a child together. Upon hearing the news, Machi was overcome with grief. Her reason for wanting to reconcile with her ex-husband was her 3 children. Yet now, all her advantages vanished in an instant. But Machi did not give up. She tried to use her youngest daughter as an excuse to get Nongu back. Nongu warned Machi to stay away from his wife. Regarding the child, he decided to use the law to gain custody. Watching Machi tumble down the stairs, Nongu felt not a shred of sympathy. The next day, Diane arrived at Machi's home with his men, warning her to be mindful of the repayment deadline. If she couldn't settle all debts within a week, her entire family's lives would be forfeit. Just as Machi reached her breaking point, she unexpectedly encountered Taehan, the lover who had swindled her of all her money. Machi seized Taehan, demanding repayment. But Taehan's own situation was far from stable. He asked Machi to wait a little longer. Taehan had now hooked up with a wealthy woman and could get the money soon. But Machi had no time left to wait. With no other options, Machi sought out Nongu and Suran, begging them for just 50 billion won, promising to do anything they asked in return. Suran flatly refused her plea. This rejection pushed Machi to the edge. Returning home, she made a drastic decision to save herself. She had her younger brother copy Nongu and Suran's handwritten notes. She then contacted Diane to arrange an accident insurance policy for the 2, naming Yumi as the beneficiary. She also discovered the payout amount was a staggering 10 billion won. Next, she approached Taehan again to conspire and execute this plan. That day, Suran received a call from the company's finance department. The funds originally diverted by Suchong under Nongu's name had been uncovered. Suran assumed her husband had taken the money to give to Machi. She confronted her husband and refused to accept any of his explanations. The couple drove to the company to uncover the truth. Unbeknownst to them, Taehan had just tampered with their vehicle. During the drive, Suran felt unwell due to her low spirits. Nongu gave her one of his sleeping pills. They continued driving, but a heavy-duty truck was following them. Taehan accelerated the truck sharply upon reaching the coast. Unaware of the danger, Nongu tried to speed up to create distance, but while navigating a curve, he realized the brakes had failed. Forced by the pursuing truck, Nongu's car lost control and plunged into the sea. After the plan succeeded, Taehan excitedly shared the news with Machi. Machi felt no joy upon hearing the news, but the thought of securing the massive 10 billion won reward immediately eased her mind. What she hadn't anticipated was that Nongu hadn't perished in the accident. Fishermen discovered him in time and rushed him to the hospital for emergency treatment. Learning Nongu had survived, Machi was horrified. She angrily berated Taehan for his incompetence and grew deeply concerned that the police might trace the car crash back to her. Suran's death dealt Holly a devastating blow. Her father had also lost his life in an accident 8 years prior. Now her mother had met such a tragic end. What Holly found even harder to accept was the police informing her her mother hadn't survived the crash because she'd taken sleeping pills. The police now suspected Nongu had a clear motive for murder. This was overheard by Machi, who had come to the hospital to probe the situation. To clear herself of suspicion, Machi resolved to frame Nongu for everything. She purchased the health supplements Nongu regularly took, replaced their contents with sleeping pill ingredients, and had Taehan discard the bottle at the accident site. Through an in-depth investigation, police uncovered substantial evidence against Nongu. They discovered that prior to the incident, Nongu and his wife had clashed over embezzled public funds. They also uncovered that Nongu had recently purchased a 10 billion won accident insurance policy for his wife. Subsequently, police found the very bottle Machi had planted at the accident site. All evidence surrounding Suran's death now pointed to Nongu. Just as Nongu was overcome with grief over his wife's death, police arrested him on charges of premeditated murder. Watching Nongu being taken away by police, Machi's heart finally settled, but Taeyan gave Machi no respite. Since the car crash wasn't ruled an accident, the insurance payout naturally fell through. The repayment deadline had passed. Taeyan wasted no words, threatening to throw Suchan off the building. Machi could only plead for more time. She assured Taeyan that Nongu's entire cosmetics company would soon be hers. Then she would repay every last debt to her. Taeyan didn't want to kill anyone either, so she gave Machi one more chance. Machi immediately began plotting to seize control of the cosmetics company. Her target was no longer just the 10 billion won insurance payout. She intended to claim everything for herself. Machi secretly approached the company's director Kui and falsely claimed she already held 15% of Nongu's shares. She promised director Kui that if he helped her secure the position of chairman at the shareholders meeting, the company president's seat would be his. Director Kui, believing her, was overjoyed. Next, to obtain the 15% stake held by Nongu, Machi began secretly framing Holly. This caused Holly's entire business operations to suffer severe setbacks, inflicting massive losses on the company. Holly faced relentless pressure from Director Kui and his faction of shareholders within the company. Upon learning of this through newspaper reports while incarcerated, Nongu instructed his lawyer to draft a share transfer document for Holly, aiming to help her weather the crisis and preserve the company. However, the lawyer had already been bribed by Machi. Instead of summoning Holly, he arranged for Yumi to meet Nongu in prison. Nongu had no choice but to ask Yumi to deliver the power of attorney to Holly. Upon receiving it, Yumi handed the document directly to her mother. She had been completely brainwashed and turned into her mother's tool. Soon, under Director Key's leadership, a shareholders meeting was convened. With Director Kui and others backing her, Machi successfully became the new chairwoman of the cosmetics company. Holly was stripped of her acting chairwoman position. This left her utterly devastated. After becoming chairwoman, Machi reveled in her triumph. She used company funds to purchase a luxury car for herself. Then she withdrew 1 billion to repay the interest owed to Taeyan. This feeling of unrestrained extravagance made Machi feel triumphant. Holly couldn't understand why her father had transferred his shares to Machi. Only after questioning her father did she learn the full story. Nongu finally realized Machi was behind everything. He knew he had to find a way out quickly. That day, the lawyer brought Nongu good news. The police had found the tool used to vandalize the car. Extracting the fingerprints would exonerate Nongu, but Machi wouldn't let things unfold so smoothly. She had already bribed the lawyer. How could he possibly share such news with Nongu? Sure enough, at the public trial, the fingerprints Nongu had hoped would exonerate him were finally extracted from the evidence. But every single print belonged to Nongu himself. This outcome was unbearable for Nongu. It turned out that after Machi learned the sunken car had been salvaged, she knew the police would inevitably discover tampering. To pin all the blame on Nongu, Machi had Taehan plant the pliers Nongu had used earlier at the park where Nongu and Suran had parked their car. Her frame-up left Nongu utterly defenseless in court. Suddenly, Machi remembered something and hurriedly left the courtroom. It turned out she and Taehan had brought newly purchased pliers to Nongu's home to replace the pair they had discarded. In court, the prosecutor argued that the evidence proving Nongu murdered his wife was irrefutable and requested the judge sentence him to death. Nongu still attempted to defend himself. He claimed he had no idea why the pliers he brought to Machi's house ended up at the crime scene. The only explanation, he insisted, was that someone was framing him. He pleaded with the police to continue investigating the case. Holly remained convinced her stepfather was innocent. She wanted to check if the pliers at home were still there. However, the pliers Machi had prepared in advance shattered Holly's last shred of trust in her stepfather. stepfather. Faced with all the irrefutable evidence, Holly came to believe her stepfather was the true murderer of her mother. Meanwhile, the real culprit, Machi, sipped coffee leisurely. Despite Holly's already miserable state, Machi still had the company repossess the house Holly was living in, leaving them homeless. With no other options, Holly had to take her devastated grandmother to rent a place. It was then that Sun-Soo, who had always liked Holly, found her. He was a lawyer who had been following Nongu's case closely, and had discovered numerous inconsistencies in the investigation. Sun-Soo first obtained the toolbox from the grandmother. He intended to have the pliers examined for Nongu's fingerprints. As he had anticipated, there were no traces of Nongu's fingerprints on the pliers inside the toolbox. Based solely on this evidence, Sun-Soo concluded that Nongu's case had been tampered with. He then visited Nongu in prison for a thorough discussion. Nongu had already deduced that Machi was the one framing him. Machi would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. He directly instructed Sun-Soo to secretly investigate Machi, believing this was the only way to clear his name. Sun-Soo found Holly and shared the suspicious details he had uncovered. This made Holly regain her trust in her stepfather. She decided to join Sun-Soo in uncovering the truth, so the two began investigating Machi. From elevator surveillance footage, they discovered that during their stepfather's trial, Machi had actually rushed back home. Unfortunately, the camera was blocked at the crucial moment. Next, they visited every hardware store in the vicinity, inquiring if anyone had recently sold the pliers shown in the photo. But all their efforts proved fruitless. Just as Holly was at a loss, Sun-Soo recalled a method he'd used to solve a previous case. Holly then confronted Machi, deliberately claiming she'd seen her buying the pliers on hardware store surveillance. She insisted Machi had secretly placed the purchased pliers in her own home. Machi wasn't about to be fooled by Holly's trick. She immediately called security to have Holly escorted out. Seizing the moment, Holly swiftly placed the listening device under the sofa. After Holly left, Machi immediately grew panicked. She feared Holly might be telling the truth. She urgently called the hardware store to inquire if they had surveillance footage. Only after learning the store lacked cameras did she breathe a sigh of relief. Machi realized Holly had been trying to bait her into confessing, but she didn't know her earlier words had been recorded by Sun-Soo through the book. It wasn't until Suji went under the sofa to retrieve a toad that the listening device was discovered. This left Machi utterly terrified. To gather more evidence, Sun-Soo submitted the forged insurance contract Diane had created for fingerprint analysis. Sure enough, the contract bore no fingerprints belonging to Nongu or Suran. Sun-Soo had finally secured crucial evidence. Meanwhile, Diane was thrown into complete panic. She immediately called Machi, demanding she prevent the forged contract from being exposed. Diane threatened Machi that if she implicated her, she would expose all of Machi's secrets. The string of bad news left Machi deeply worried. At this moment, Haijin finally couldn't bear the blow and developed Alzheimer's disease. This presented an opportunity for Machi. Taking advantage of Haijin's memory loss, she took her away and placed her under Taehan's custody. Armed with this leverage, Machi went to prison and told Nongu, "If you don't confess to being Suran's real killer, your mother-in-law will never see Holly again." Nongu knew Machi was a ruthlessly vicious woman. For his mother-in-law's safety, he had no choice but to confess to the crime directly in court. Holly couldn't understand why her stepfather would lie. Machi was thoroughly satisfied with this outcome. Yet upon facing reporters outside, she instantly adopted a look of profound grief. Nongu's confession ultimately secured his mother-in-law's safety. Unwilling to die unjustly, Nongu attempted suicide. Fortunately, a cellmate discovered him in time and saved his life. The cellmate revealed his older brother, Sun-Tae, sympathized deeply with Nongu's plight and resolved to help him. Nongu refused to die in such a pathetic manner. After meeting Sun-Tae, he agreed to accept his assistance. Sun-Tae promptly produced a pill that induced a state of suspended animation. 10 minutes after ingesting the pill, its effects would take hold. The guards would then rush Nongu, now seemingly lifeless, to the hospital for emergency treatment. Meanwhile, Sun-Tae had his men deliberately stage a traffic accident en route. When the guards got out to investigate, they knocked them all unconscious. Then they rescued Nongu from the ambulance. Within the drug's specified time frame, Sun-Tae injected the antidote into Nongu's body, restoring him to normal. Finally, they staged another vehicle accident. By the time the police found the hijacked car, it had been burned to a charred shell. Inside lay a charred corpse matching Nongu's build but unrecognizable. Thus, everyone believed Nongu had tragically perished. Unaware of the truth, Machi rejoiced upon hearing the news. The 10 billion won accident insurance policy she had purchased for Nongu now met the payout requirements. Not only had Nongu died bearing all the blame from Machi, but he had also secured her a 10 billion won compensation payout. After waking up, Nongu was brutally beaten by Sun-tae's men. Sun-tae did this because Suran was his first love. He rescued Nongu only to kill him with his own hands and avenge Suran. Nongu said Suran was also his beloved wife. His sole reason for living was to see the murder punished. Yet Sun-tae refused to believe Nongu's words. He tracked down Sun-soo, the lawyer who had defended Nongu. From Sun-soo, Sun-tae learned Nongu had been framed. Ultimately, he resolved to help Nongu expose the true mastermind behind the crime. But soon after, Sun-tae passed away from a serious illness. Before his death, he entrusted all his assets to Nongu. His dying wish was for Nongu to catch the killer who murdered Suran. Over the next year, Nongu built his strength abroad. He expanded the business empire entrusted to him by Sun-tae. Upon returning to Korea, the first person Nongu sought out was Sun-soo, who had aided him before. He asked Sun-soo to continue assisting him in gathering evidence against Machi. Next, Nongu approached Machi posing as an investor. Machi was utterly shocked upon seeing Nongu. Nongu claimed it was merely a resemblance. To dispel Machi's doubts, Nongu deliberately brought Machi to the police station for fingerprint comparisons and DNA testing. The results, of course, showed no match whatsoever. This finally cleared Machi's suspicions. In reality, Nongu had applied fake fingerprints before the test. The hair used for DNA testing was also from a pre-prepared wig. Step by step, Machi fell into the investment trap Nongu had set. By the time she realized all her funds were locked in, it was already too late. With Nongu's covert assistance, Holly presented evidence of Machi's unauthorized embezzlement to shareholders at the general meeting. Faced with irrefutable proof, Machi was stripped of her one-year presidency. Shortly after, prosecutors sealed off her residence. Yet Nongu remained unsatisfied with this punishment. He sought not only to clear his own name, but also send Machi to prison to avenge his wife. Then Taehan's appearance changed everything. A year prior, he'd taken the 10 billion won Machi paid him and fled overseas. Now, having squandered every last penny, Taehan demanded more money from Machi. He threatened to expose all her crimes to the police if she refused. Machi refused to be controlled like this. She deliberately rammed her car into Taehan. When police arrived, Taehan was already dead. Upon learning this, Nongu immediately suspected Machi. He revealed his true identity and arrested her. Nongu intended to send Machi to hell by his own means. At the critical moment, Holly's arrival snapped Nongu out of his madness. She refused to see her stepfather become a real murderer for killing Machi. Holly informed her stepfather that she and Sun-soo had found video evidence of Machi murdering Taehan. They only needed to wait a little longer to send Machi to prison. Nongu, now exposed, was reported to the police by Machi, who had temporarily escaped, though imprisoned once more. Nongu's subordinates methodically carried out every act of vengeance against Machi. Holly gave Machi no respite either, broadcasting the murder video to the public via television. Ultimately, Machi was arrested by police before the eyes of the entire nation. Haejin finally smiled upon seeing this scene. Yet upon her release, Machi encountered her two children. Aware of their mother's heinous crimes, the children refused to acknowledge her. Witnessing this, Machi made a cruel decision. Seizing a moment when the police weren't watching, she rushed to the driver's seat. Then, with her two children aboard, she sped away. She intended to take both children with her to their deaths. Ultimately, Machi forced her children out of the car. She would rather die than admit her guilt. She then stepped on the gas pedal and drove straight toward the cliff ahead. However, Machi did not die in the crash. She was eventually apprehended by the police and prepared to face legal consequences. All of Machi's crimes had been proven. Nongu was finally exonerated, but because he had escaped prison during his sentence, he still had to serve 1 year in jail. Meanwhile, Machi was ultimately deemed a severe threat to society. Therefore, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. Holly worked hard to inherit her mother's cosmetics company. Nongu returned to his family after serving his sentence. Holly and Sun-soo eventually found happiness together. To film ends here. Please like and follow us. See you next time.